MGL Team Tournament Round 3. By now, most people remaining in the MGL are not here by accident. The easy matches are mostly gone. The obvious mistakes are mostly gone. Most understand expansion. Most understand doctrines. Most understand combat mechanics. So now, the smallest details became the difference between survival and collapse. This round divided players across two world maps, creating simultaneous wars across Europe, Africa, North America and South America. Some battles became tactical masterpieces, some became complete steamrolls, and some became warnings. Warnings that even undefeated teams can fall. Today we break down every major clash of MGL Round 3, because what happened here wasn't simply war, it was strategy, psychology, coordination and in some cases, disaster. One mistake, one miscalculation, one failed plan, and your entire tournament can disappear within hours. Let's begin with the clash of Map 1. Lexan and Nobking played by German Empire and South Germany against Wolf Emperor, and Primal Orchid played as Aragon and Hungary. This battle began long before war started. Diplomacy had already entered the battlefield. Wolf Emperor and Primal Orchid opened war with an aggressive expansion strategy. France, Northern Italy, nearby contested territory. Anything that could increase manpower and resource became a target. But before expansion continued, both teams negotiated rules regarding right-of-the-way traps. The agreement was simple. Right-of-the-way would only be used if absolutely necessary. If armies became stuck, they would be allowed a safe return. Primal also agreed to not take Kurland and Krakow under one condition: no buildings. So everything looked peaceful and everything looked organized until confusion started. Wolf was later accused of using right-of-the-way tactic to take contested territory in France. Rather than escalating the situation, a compromise was reached. Marseille and Bilbao were given away after troops withdrew. Problem solved, but at a cost. Italian expansion slowed down, and in tournament games, timing matters. Despite a setback, Wolf and Prime already had larger plans. Move both capitals westward into former Cossack territory, prepare a two-sided invasion against South Germany. But Germany noticed what was happening. Using right-of-the-way, they expanded towards those same areas. Eventually they formed their own strategy, gather forces, move through Rostov-on-Don and strike the capitals unexpectedly. A dangerous plan, but one that sadly never happened due to lack of activity. This plan would require huge activity and proactivity after the successful embarkation. However, because of the lack of activity, they were forced to stay within the reins of their territories and nations, and thus held off the offensive and proceed in a counterattack, reaching both capitals. After peace finally ended, Europe has exploded. Wolf launched multiple mechanized offensive on the Western Front. South Germany suddenly found itself under enormous pressure. But the most frustrating move wasn't military power, it was confusion. Infantry scattered deep into enemy territory, small groups appearing everywhere. No major damage, no massive battles, just constant pressure, constant uncertainty. The feeling of being attacked from every direction was a type of psychological warfare. Nobking attempted to respond with bombers. Primo was ready. Anti-air batteries neutralized the threat almost immediately. Meanwhile, the Eastern Hungarian front slowed considerably. Germany relied heavily on artillery and AMGs. There was back and forth fighting, but no meaningful breakthroughs. No momentum, no gains. Meanwhile, on the western side, Wolf kept advancing, and advancing, and advancing. Then came the decisive moment. Lexan's capital fell only hours after peace ended. Immediately pressure shifted towards Nobking's capital, which had no anti-air protection, and endured continuous bombardment. Hungary established siege positions, while Wolf pinned down South German forces. Defenses started collapsing. Several hours later, Nobking's capital fell. It was game over. Interesting enough, in the previous round, we said that the meta favors the artillery guys. However, in this case, we can see that Primal Orchid has decided to use the noble to a different possibility, which was a heavy mech. Now, in order to target the meta of artillery, the enemy simply has to outgun either bring more artilleries to the fight, or bring bigger guns, such as siege mechs, to the gun with bigger range. But there is an alternative. Create a heavy mech as a noble, where nobody would expect, and as your light unit or a light artillery, which is good against light targets, is not so efficient against such a high powerhouse as heavy mech. It's a high risk, high reward. First, I think it's the first time that it was ever used, and it was successful. Could we see a birth of a new meta? Why was this victory so dominant? 3 reasons. Reasons already visible in previous rounds, and also visible in all of the victors in this round. First, expansion with minimal losses. Large territory means little if your army dies acquiring it. Wolf and Primo expanded rapidly while preserving strength, which is different to what they did in round 2, where they didn't expand as much. This means larger economies, which means more manpower, and more manpower means more units. Secondly, doctrine choices. Germany noble doctrine encouraged heavy artillery investment, strong against lighter units, much weaker against mechanized pressure. Once Aragon's mechanized brigads broke through, German support struggled to react, and South Germany, not having enough anti-mech guns, couldn't keep up against the vast amount of mechanized troops. One has to remember that 6 AMGs are way better than 6 mechanized troops. However, 6 AMGs will have a difficulty dealing with 12 mechanized troops charging onto your capital, because you have to remember that it's not beating your armies, it's capturing the capitals that is the most crucial point of this tournament, or of the clash in the round. Third, vision. The strongest teams don't simply react. Every expansion, every doctrine choice, every movement, everything serves a larger purpose. Teams with vision win wars. Those that can execute the 3 points to the perfection will definitely get a win. In this case, the Wolf and Primo Orchid were closer to perfection than their counter opponents, and they claimed the victory and proceeded to the next round. Even though Lexan and Nopking has invested into light artillery and AMGs, it just wasn't enough because of lack of expansion and lack of activity to use those micromanagement elements to beat their opponents. Next up we have the bar and dropkick versus Django and Pompeo. Unfortunately, this battle never truly developed. Huber's position created major distance issues from the start, and as the game progressed, time limitations became even more significant. What should have become a longer tactical conflict instead turned into a quick and one-sided clash, because Django and Pompeo weren't active enough, thus bringing no major turning points, no spectacular maneuvers, just pressure building in one direction until the game ended. Sometimes wars finish before they really begin. In this clash, Pompeo wasn't able to be active almost at all, thus being outnumbered. First and foremost, Django was taken care of, and once that happened, the team has forfeited, not showing really a lot. Which is counter to what they did in the last, when the core of their tactics was maneuverability. Next fight we have a fight for Africa. Maxi and Black Plague in Nubian Empire and Ethiopian Empire versus Foxy and Lordsent, played by Voodoo Cult and Hausa Union. At first glance this battle looked similar to South America, expansion, growth, conquest. But one difference changed everything: losses. Maxi and Black Plague expanded, but paid heavily for a territory. Meanwhile, Foxy and Lordsent expanded almost perfectly. No significant losses, only gains, immediately creating stronger economies and healthier armies. The strategy became simple: artillery for support, bombers for flexibility, AMGs for additional pressure. Straightforward, reliable. But the biggest advantage wasn't military, it was understanding their opponents. Foxy and Set knew something important. Maxi and Black Plague historically struggled with cooperation, and eventually that weakness appeared. When war started, Black Plague's army remained far from the front line. Units were damaged, forces were spread out, which meant that Maxi suddenly found himself almost alone. Maxi believed defense was necessary to push capitals, Apply pressure, create opportunities. Black Plague believed the opposite. Defend, wait, punish overextension. 2 strategies, 1 team. In tournament games, punish hesitation. As Foxy and Cent pushed forward, encirclements began appearing. One pocket, then another, then another. Armies disappeared, positions collapsed, momentum vanished, and after that, the battle became completely one-sided. In here, we just have one example of perfect micromanagement. You have 3 stacks of artilleries shooting against 1 stack of enemy. Now, because he's shooting, the enemy is returning the fire, and Foxy has just done 3 times the damage as those of his opponent. This proves that you can have the same amount of armies, but if you don't know how to use them, or you're not active enough to use them, you will deal way less damage than your opponent. The strategy was simple. Use the motorized infantries to gain the ground and quickly encircle and capture the air bases to ground the bombers. And once that happens, bring the fight to their capitals and pierce through to use the unit advantage and health advantage, position advantage, to test the teamwork of Maxi and Black, which was far worse than those of Lord Cent, and I got you hard. This wasn't a victory, it was a domination from the start. Perfect embodiment of vision, preparation, expansion, and relentlessness. Despite their previous loss, they have gained a victory and proved everybody that they are still in the game of winning the tournament. And even though their opponents were not as demanding when it comes to activity and preparation, they did indeed perform very well in the expansion phase with just casualties of HP. However, they weren't able to withstand the tempo brought by Foxy and Lord Cent. Now on map 2, we had Yoda and Arrow versus King Joe and CAG Thunder. This battle wasn't decided by overwhelming firepower, it was decided by restriction. Yoda and Arrow entered it with a very clear objective: prevent enemy expansion, isolate targets, create 2 versus 1 engagements whenever possible, and most importantly, remove enemy armies from the battlefield without even fighting them. The strategy focused on controlling movement. Capitals were relocated, expansion paths restricted, and eventually the trap was prepared. CAG Thunder walked directly into it. His army became isolated and dropped away from the front line. Before his expansion began, he was already trapped. And as he didn't expand into New Mexico, he was blocked from the south and seriously capped in the south. He was blocked in the north and capped in the south. Suddenly, a large amount of military strength existed, but could not actually participate in the war in the beginning phase. It's one of the cruelest things possible in Iron Order, watching your own army survive while becoming completely useless. And from there, things escalated quickly. Unlike previous rounds, activity levels simply weren't there. Expansion was slower, team coordination was weaker, momentum disappeared. Within only 3 to 4 hours of war, both capitals had fallen. North America ended almost before it started. Texas and Deutsche America prepared mainly AMGs and artilleries against mechanized troops and bombers of Nouvelle Louisiana and CAG Thunder. Mexico has failed to utilize his doctrine. He was a noble, but he invested in mechs. And Nouvelle Louisiana, being a capitalist, instead of investing in mechs and bombers, he invested in mechs, artillery, and anti-air units. In the end, being on his own, he wasn't able to save his capital, as it fell after the 4th hour. Now in Africa, Twite and Claymore has secured a victory against Dr. Eric and Aramo, thus eliminating them from the tournament purely by Dr. Eric and Aramo surrendering and forfeiting the tournament and quitting the round. There isn't much analysis required there. The opponents surrendered, walkover victory. So we are getting to the 2 final clashes of the currently unbeaten teams. Boatmech and Windows instead of Marshall versus Kirito and Pavok played as Kurland and Hungary. Both teams have not even lost a capital since the beginning of the tournament. Perfect records, and for many people, a likely tournament final happening early. Kirito and Pavok entered this battle looking almost unstoppable. Through previous rounds they had played flawlessly. Least unit losses among all teams. No capitals lost. Everything suggested another victory. It was Boatmech and Windows which were the underdogs. And then, the first major surprise of the tournament happened. Looking at the map itself, things initially seemed heavily in Kirito's and Pavok's favor. Germany and Finland against Kurland and Hungary appeared difficult for Boat and Windows. Communistic mechanized armies require open terrain, close combat, freedom of movement. Kurland's terrain offered very little of that. One has to remember that in Europe there's about 373 points and 373 provinces, and a lot of them, if not most of them, are the difficult terrain. Similar platform wars against the fighting. The main clashes would be in South German, German Empire, Hungary, Romania, Cossack, Kurland, Russian Empire, Poland, and such. They have around about 71 difficult terrain provinces, and only 40 are about a plain terrain. Now, the main advantage that the melee combat has over the communist fighting has over the noble is on plain terrain, where the mechanized units have damage support, whereas nobles, as artillery, they don't have additional damage support, as they prefer to fight on a difficult terrain. Moreover, Hungary and Kurland has about 45 cities, or let's say it's much easier for them to take over the 45 cities, even if we are gonna say that South Germany, for example, is going to be disputed between the two, and let's say 3 towns would go to the other team and 2 towns would go to that. It's still between round about 35 to 45 cities which they could take in short time. This is different to the German and Finland, where they should have round about 39 cities contested at a short notice, with Russian Empire being in dispute, same as South Germany, so they should have around about 35 cities different to their opponents. That is, of course, if Kurland and Hungary successfully trap Finland and conquer Russia first, thus blocking from further conquest. Big difficult terrain means slower movement and more exposure to support fire. Everything suggested problems ahead, then suddenly everything changed. Ironically, after dropping previous opponents, Kirito became trapped himself, inside Russia. Half of his army suddenly became blocked. Expansion slowed dramatically. Mobility disappeared, and suddenly his preferred melee armies, that is Boatmechs, could finally operate effectively. The reason why the meta is always victorious, or the current meta with artilleries and AMGs, is because by the time the mechanized units reach artilleries or AMGs, they will be most likely dead, as they usually need about 2 or 3 hours to reach the targets, and thus they can get destroyed. However, 6 mechanized troops are usually weaker than 6 AMGs, but 12 mechanized troops are often stronger than 6 AMGs, as they can get to them much faster, if only you can afford it. Now in this case, Kirito has done all the hard work for both. By getting his units trapped, the melee didn't have to chase. He can just place his units at the beginning of the round and thus quickly eliminate a third of Kirito's army without even chasing him and without getting additional damage. This means that the artilleries, which usually are protected by the mechanized units as buffers and additional HP, are now light units with not 1300 HP, but perhaps 900 HP. A significant change, because apart from that, his further expansion is also blocked. And with just this simple move, Finland has gained access to Cossack territory. And in Iron Order, losing like that creates a chain reaction. Smaller army, smaller economy. Less expansion, less manpower, less flexibility. Less flexibility means predictability, and predictability is easy to deal with. Both immediately recognized the opportunity. Kurland territory began disappearing rapidly. Economic differences started growing, and suddenly the previously undefeated giants looked vulnerable for the first time. Now, the expansion of German Empire and Finland has came with a big cost of HP. They have lost around about 1,500 of HP of their entire stacks. But this match also showed something worth mentioning. Both teams agreed on peace times and war times, meaning they respected availability and real-life responsibilities instead of forcing endless activity. Other teams could learn something from that. Competitive play doesn't require sacrificing family or responsibilities. After the first day, Boat and Windows had a major advantage, but still, the match wasn't over. Pavok's army remained largely intact, and Germany and Finland had paid prices during expansion. Units damaged, HP lost, there was still an opportunity. One mistake on Windows, and momentum could shift. But it never happened, because Windows simply refused to lower his guard. Activity, micromanagement, positioning, every opportunity was used perfectly. As Boat pushed southward, Finland eventually reached Hungary's borders. The difference became too large. Kirito and Pavok eventually surrendered, and for the first time in MGL, the giants had fallen. Both Mech and Windows proceed to the final round. Now we arrive at perhaps the most dramatic battle of round 3. Joseph and Time Lord versus Thor and Balkan. Two more undefeated teams. Another clash for dominance. Joseph and Time Lord with two noble nations against Thor's capitalist doctrine and Balkan's communist doctrine. South America itself changes everything. Just like in Europe, there's 370 cities. In South America there's only 252, and most of them are difficult, which severely highlights the importance of noble nation and their doctrine advantage on a difficult terrain. Truly, a communist doctrine has it very difficult, as only 48 provinces out of 252 are plain terrain. Furthermore, a third of those provinces are found in either deep south or top north position. So in this clash, not really relevant. Apart from the fact the Argentinian Empire, which is a noble nation, has 8 plain terrain. But South America itself really caps the expansion opportunities. Thus, resources are tighter, manpower becomes scarce, and every city becomes valuable. Every casualty hurts twice as much. The NAP period here became perhaps the most intense scene in the tournament so far. Every province mattered, and every movement mattered. Initially, the fight remained relatively balanced. Then suddenly Thor made a major mistake. A large portion of his army became trapped in the center, away from immediate support. Immediately this reduced combat power, reduced HP, reduced frontline coverage, because just like in Kirito's face, you lose 7 or 8 units, you lose around about 500 to 600 HP that could protect your stack of light artilleries. Time Lord secured northern provinces, creating a large buffer zone, thus meaning that he would be struggling to assist Bolivia. Everything looked perfect for Joseph and Time Lord. Everything. In South America, the center is very important. Presumably, if Guyana wants to help in timely manner or to transition the units from one to another, he has to invest and has to directly expand into Dominion to not get himself choked out. These 3 provinces are the most crucial, because first and foremost they are granting the way south and enabling the reinforcements in timely manner, but apart from that they are also providing a very good choke points for a lot of the province of Brazil. Time Lord had only 2 tasks in this case: kill the trapped units, push up to the north, and basically buy a lot of time for Joseph to deal with Tor. Now, they have done a perfect matchup of calculations. Or, let's say not perfect, but a very good one. If you capture 5 cities, one city at a 25% morale gives you round about 100 manpower. So 5 cities, 500 manpower for a day. In the second day, you take another 5 cities, so you have 10 cities, around 1,000 manpower per day. In the day 3, you get additional, so you get around about 4,000, 4,500 in the 4-day NAP period. Apart from the manpower that you get, which is about 15,000 in total. Apart from what you naturally produce. As a communist, your upkeep is lower. So you have around about that. Now, in order to support all of these units, of course you have to pay a lot of metal. So they have done that. The Bolivia has sent the resources of metal and supplied a lot of resources to the communist doctrine, which could bring a lot of units. But this meant that Bolivia had to forsake basically the creation of siege mechs. He was left with AMGs, artilleries, AA and bombers against Joseph, who had siege mechs, AMGs, artilleries, anti-air units, and was clearly crushing Tor's territory. After just couple hours of the fight, they have entered most of the core terrain and captured most of the core cities of Tor, thus basically making it impossible for him to create a lot of new units. They had advantage in economy, position and units. However, what they lacked in is a total misplacement of units. The AMGs of Joseph should be in north, defending and helping against Guyana. They assumed that focusing together on Tor would end the battle faster, and while doing so, they left the north completely empty. 3 ideal defensive choke points, 3 places capable of slowing armies for hours, left undefended, and instead of brutal fighting taking place there, they fell in only 4 to 5 hours. Meanwhile, Guyana wasn't waiting. Before Joseph and Time Lord finished surrounding Tor, Guyana was already at Brazil's back door, with larger armies, with close combat forces, and with momentum. Suddenly the battlefield completely changed. Time Lord realized the danger and began retreating, but it was too late. The momentum had already totally shifted. Then Balkan arrived, communistic production had done its work, numbers had increased, melee armies reached the front line, siege mechs provided additional range support, and on paper, even though Joseph and Time Lord still had advantages, with AMG's doctrine advantage, even slight numerical superiority, but strategy during war phase became a mixture of mistakes and miscalculations. Bomb members targeted incorrectly, AMGs positioned incorrectly, threats identified too late, and after days of preparation, 4 days of escalating all of their strategies perfectly, they failed by simply walking their armies the wrong way and losing all of their hard-worked advantages in a couple of hours. Balkan has won this war simply by marching, just like Napoleon at Ulm. Tor's army had a HP of 1100, whereas Joseph's army had about 1700. Economy by Tor was gone, and Joseph was still at his high power. However, this one blunder, followed by inactivity because of private life, meant that through the dedication and activity, Tor and Balkan has, despite all odds and after so many blunders, believed in their vision, believed in their activity and communication to pick themselves up and provide a big comeback and a victory in the end. Round 3 showed one lesson above everything else. Iron Order is not won through statistics, it's not won simply through doctrines, and it's not won simply through numbers. It's won through vision, through teamwork, through understanding where the battle will happen before it actually begins. Because sometimes the most dangerous armies aren't the largest ones, they are the ones already moving toward victory before the war even starts. Round 3 is finished, but the tournament is far from over. Let's see how the round 4 will show us the capabilities of players. Now, to quickly go through the S-rank tier, I think that Balkan deserved to be the top. Kirito and Pavok dropped from the S-rank because of the many blunders of being blocked units in the middle of the field and then not realizing the threat of both mech, possibly as a communist nation created mechs. They could perhaps turn it around like Balkan and Tor, but didn't. Both mech and Gueros proved that they are capable of performing even at a bigger level than they previously did, and proceeded to the final. And Time Lord and Joseph, despite losing, they did perform flawlessly until the battlefield arrived, and even at the battlefield they did okay. However, they were unfortunate to fight those that were really dedicated, to spend a lot of time and have vision and calculations and plan, which they executed back, thus claiming victory in the end. Now of course Dr. Eric gave up, so it's an F. Django and King Joe both were eliminated and didn't really show a lot of dedication this round. Those two teams did show something, however I don't think it's enough. On this stage they had a good, let's say, use of units and expansion, however there was missing of activity and definitely an expansion and war phase. Yodo and Arrow advanced onto the C tier, and they showed again that they are still there to be considered for the victors. Wolf and Prime Orchid definitely raised their level to the B tier, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they will fight in another fight against Zero and Claymore. Now I moved Sent and Foxy into the top of A tier because I think they deserve. I don't think they yet have hit the S rank, the calculations, but I think it's very hard to tell because of who they were fighting. Normally I would place Daba and Dropkick above Kirito and Pavuk, but again Daba and Dropkick didn't fight those that were really a challenging round, and on top of that they have lost in the first round against Kirito and Pavuk, so I can't place them above them. In the end, I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in round 4.